Hey, it's Tony Brueski, and this is our week in review over the weekend, taking a look back at some of the most compelling conversations and stories that we've covered for you of the last week. Brand new episodes back Monday morning, bright and early, 5 a.m. here on the podcast.
This is an examination of the hidden human condition.
This is the Hidden Killers Podcast.
The Hidden Killers Podcast.
With Tony Brueski.
Dr. John Delatorre is with us right now, licensed psychologist, and we're going to be digging into what's going on right now in the trial of Scott Peterson, the Parkland Resource police officer who failed to follow the training in an active shooter situation and stood outside of the school. He's being tried right now for not taking action. Any human being, if you hear gunshots, it's fight or flight for a moment or two. It's a little different when it's someone who's trained to be the person that is going to stand up for anyone that is in danger, and it's your job to do so. What do we make of what happened here and how he failed so miserably in doing anything, and now obviously has a good chunk of society looking at him as a coward, essentially?
I mean, it's already in the perception of it, right? In just how you described it to me, Tony, right? All of that stuff. Did he fail? I'm pretty sure he feels guilty. I'm pretty sure he believes that he failed, that he was supposed to protect these children and he didn't. But did he fail? I mean, at some point we have to think about, can someone actually ignore and override? What I mean is the training sufficient for that individual to override what is biologically inherent to the system, which is the body's going to protect itself no matter what? And I think this is a real referendum on this idea that we can train anybody to do anything. And once we've trained them to do that thing, then they must do that thing without consequence. And the reality is, especially from our soldiers returning from Afghanistan and Iraq, is that we can train and train and train, but if we don't teach them how to actually incorporate your own emotional elevation that is happening in those intense situations, you're going to come back with PTSD. That's what's just going to happen. And so I think this is a real referendum on the idea that not everybody can ignore and override. I think some people, they want to, and they have every, they have every belief that they're going to be able to do it. But the reality is that unless you're put in that situation, you have no idea what you're going to do.
And that's very true. What I would ask you then is, how do you essentially ingrain that well enough into people to know that they're going to statistically very likely act the way we want them to and be able to override their own emotions? I would imagine that has to be a very individualized treatment to each person as to what their triggers would be to override something or fight or flight.
Well, I think it's actually that we have to start incorporating psychologists and other mental health professionals from the beginning of training. Psychological help shouldn't ever just be following something. It should be at every point in the training, whatever it is, so that when we're teaching someone to engage in a behavior that isn't normal, what I mean by that it's not a typical part of what your day-to-day life is going to be, like pulling a gun and killing someone. That's not a normal day-to-day behavior. So we have to start thinking about, what are the person's morals? What are the person's ethics? Under what situations does a single individual allow themselves to engage in that behavior without question? And what are the circumstances in which they begin to question why they're doing what they're doing? A psychologist can help that individual do that. And it doesn't have to be individualized, meaning that it's an hour a week, every week. I don't mean by that. No, there are ways in which a psychologist can even work within a group so that they begin to incorporate the rationale behind why you're doing that behavior. Once it becomes a part of your overall decision making, you're less likely to hesitate, because it's now part of the overall flow chart of how you're going to be rendering the decision as the situation presents itself.
With that being said, what kind of a precedent is this setting, putting a resource officer on trial for failing to act in the way that he was expected to act in the future? Is this a good precedent showing that there will be consequences to you failing to act? Or should this not even be going on, period, and should be resolved or handled in a very different way to better understand how all of this works, how it plays out, how we can avoid this again? Are we just going after a boogeyman here right now?
I think it's a little bit of all of that stuff. So I think a better precedent is putting the parents on trial for their negligence or their recklessness when it comes to their culpability in their child engaging in an act. I think that's a better precedent. I think this one we have to recognize, though, that just because you wear a badge doesn't mean that whatever it is that you do is okay. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is whether you engage in a proactive behavior or whether you engage in a behavior in which you don't do something, right? Like this individual is being accused of not doing something. Mm-hmm. So the badge doesn't protect you. So I think that's an important precedent that always needs to be there, that we're constantly watching the watchers, mm-hmm. right? So that everyone understands that just because you are in a position of authority doesn't excuse any behavior that you might have done that is in breach of that authority. So I think that's important. But I also think that perhaps we're looking at hanging someone out to dry because all of these lives are lost. And for whatever reason, we have not been satisfied with the justice that we have so far. And so I do think it is a bit of a boogeyman situation in this. But again, if you decide, and I think this is part of the problem that we're running into, is that if you decide that you're going to wear a badge, then you have to understand the higher level of duty that you have to society. And I think that's going to be a problem because if some civilian thinks that if I don't save someone else's life, if I don't lose my life saving someone else's life, then I'm going to be put on trial. I think that's going to stop people from wanting to put on the badge when we're in desperate need of good people wearing a badge and protecting us as citizens.
This is an examination of the hidden human condition.
This is the Hidden Killers Podcast
with Tony Brueski.
Psychologist Dr. John Delatorre, as always, thank you so much for your time and insight into the cases that we cover right here. Hey, if you want an ad-free experience of the show, you can get it through Apple Podcasts. Just sign up right now on Apple Podcasts to become a premium subscriber. There, you'll get access to all of our episodes commercial-free on all of our podcasts in the True Crime Today family. So it's not just one you get ad-free. You get all of the family of shows there through our premium subscription offering on Apple Podcasts. Do check that out. Even try it for 3 days free. I'm Tony Brueski. Stay with us.